In Pakistan, child labor is against the law, but is nevertheless widely prevalent. This has been exacerbated by catastrophic floods last year that destroyed infrastructure and made many families homeless, and has been compounded by the political and economic spiral the country has been in general.
Tahir Abbas doesn't go to school, and he doesn't particularly mind it. But he's also too young to understand what he might be losing out on. He says his father wanted him to start working.
Conditions at my home were not good. My father said education had gained him nothing. So he said it would be better for me to learn the work of a car mechanic instead of going to school. I open the shop at 10 a.m. and get free by night. I like doing this job.
Tahir's father says he didn't have much of a choice when it came to educating his children.
I want my two sons to go to school, but I can't afford it. School fees and books are so expensive. How should I pay for that?
In Pakistan, many families suffering from poverty face this situation, and parents feel compelled to ask their kids to bring home an earning. Estimates have put the number of child workers in the millions within the country.
I urge Pakistan's government to consider the situation and come up with some plan so that our children can be educated. We're Pakistanis too.
Pakistan's government does have laws against child labor. For instance, anyone who employs a child or allows a child to labor shall be imprisoned or be asked to pay a hefty fine, or both. But the illegal practice still continues. Shamim Mumtaz worked for a government body to safeguard children in the Sindh region and found that poverty throws a spanner in the works, but it is not taken into consideration when laws are made.
We had restricted several factories, telling them to not employ children. But the reality on the ground is very different. If his father is a labourer and barely earning anything, how can he pay a hefty fine?
Meanwhile, Tahir is growing up as a mechanic and learning the craft from his employer, Sadiq Ali. Ali too started work as a child and made his way up to being an entrepreneur.
Many people here started as child laborers, and now they have their own shops in this market.
Generations remain caught in this vicious circle. And each one that doesn't attend school makes it more likely that their children won't either.
From Islamabad, we have Asya Arif, Executive Director of SPARK, the Society for the Protection of the Rights of the Child. Thanks for joining us. Asya, it seems as if poor families have no choice but to focus on short-term financial considerations, even if they understand the long-term gains of education.
Yeah, it's correct. They have no choice when it comes to poverty, and of course, when they hardly have enough to make both ends meet. But pushing children into child labor is not at all a solution to that, because even if you're pushing a child into work at a very early age, not only are you just allowing that child to be a part of perilous work or maybe hazards, but also you are also pushing him into some sort of economic deprivation, because children in Pakistan and all over South Asia, I would say all of the world, they are not paid off well. They are paid far below what an adult can get. So saying that families have little option but to push their children into child labor, maybe it's something that needs to be looked into and maybe debated into and talked further.
What is the biggest problem here? Is it the lack of accessible education, or with the lack of enforcement, or something else? I'm sure it's everything, but what is the big issue?
I believe lack of enforcement is an issue. We have good laws in place. Article 25A of Pakistan's constitution, it guarantees right to education, right to compulsory and free education for every child from the age of 15 to 16 years. But then enforcement remains to be an issue. Of course, enforcement is something that comes from the government. So if I just briefly explain it, or maybe if I just try to expedite my thoughts here, but the thing is, of course, when it comes to ground realities and when it comes to implementation, situation remains far too weak. And plus, needless to mention, or maybe another point is that Pakistan is also very prone to hazards, which are environmental hazards and other hazards. We recently had COVID. COVID pushed too many children out of school, then followed by floods in 2022, which were the super floods. Children were again out in 3 provinces, Punjab, KP, and Balochistan. Although NGOs have also taken over and they are also working for rehabilitation of children into the schools, but the children that have been pushed out by COVID are, I believe, we fear they are not yet back to school. Rather, they are somewhere out working on the roads, maybe in restaurants, along roadsides, or maybe employed in a house where you cannot really enter and check. And plus, more worrisome factor is that according to Pakistan Labour Force Survey 2017 and 2018, 13.7% of children who are between the ages of 10 to 17 years, they are engaged in child labor. And out of them, 5.4% are in hazardous labor, which is mining. It's something that brings hazard, like bonded labor, like mining, like they're being exposed to chemicals. So situation is, overall the situation is, the problem is immense. There are good solutions to it. You need to put all the children back to schools, but for that you have to have social safety nets. So children are not really compelled by their parents, by their mothers or fathers, or children who are orphans. They are often asked to go out and earn for their families. So this is the main issue that needs to be dealt in Pakistan, in context of Pakistan.
When you talk about COVID and the impact that has had, to what extent has the downward spiral of the economy driven more families to put their children to work?
Yeah, when COVID struck, fortunately in Pakistan, the impact was far less compared to other neighboring countries like India or maybe Bangladesh. But then families actually asked their children to go out and earn, and they were actually pushed into labor because at that time, children were employed for far less wages compared to adult laborers, like I just mentioned in the start of the interview. And then with the school closure and no access to internet or no access to other modern forms of technology that were required to continue education, they could not really get back to schools. So a big gap came, a gap of 3 to 6 months. And during that gap, they were out of schools and most of them were never really able to enroll. I'm not talking about urban schools here. I'm talking about children who live in rural periphery, who go to schools, who may be very downtrodden, but still they are trying to cater to needs of children when it comes to education. So I believe, Spark believes COVID has had immense impact. Situation was already not good. In Pakistan, before COVID, we had 22.8 million children who were out of schools. And after COVID and after floods, the situation has, again, rapidly deteriorated.
Asya Arif, thank you so much for joining us.